good morning, everybody, online and offline, and welcome to this talk by Professor Shalan Christensen, who is visiting us from the University of Bath, where she's professor of bilingualism and applied linguistics, and she's in the College of Education, right? Faculty of Education, right?
School of Education.
Department of Education.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think many of you know Professor Shalan either in person or by person or through her work. She has done lots and lots of research and has published extensively on the topics of bilingualism, multilingualism, and also language policy. Today, she's going to talk to us about family language policy and school language policy. What do teachers need to know? And I think this is going to be a highly relevant topic for all of us here. And I think Prof. Shalan said that she will focus also on some of the practical matters, right? And so I think that will appeal to many of us. So let's give her a round of applause and welcome.
Thank you very much, Sheila, and thank you, Anai. Thank you, Anai, for inviting me here. I'm very happy to share my work with the people near and far. So, but I'm sure I can learn a lot from you as well, because you are in a very, very typical and special situation when it comes to bilingual education, and then families and teachers, how you, you know, in this special context, how you work together. So, I'm just going to, I think this one, So as we all know, migration is, provided lots of opportunities, but also giving us some issues to deal with. And according to the migration report in 2022, there were 281 million people leaving the country, you know, other than their country of birth. So these migration trends, of course, create a space for us to talk about bilingualism, multilingualism. And from ilanguage.com, we got this information that actually there are only 40% of the population, the world population, are monolinguals. And 43% of the population are bilinguals, and 13% population are trilingual, and then another smaller percentage of people are multilinguals. So this means that monolingual is a minority and multilingual is the norm. The question is, with such a number of multilingual people, and in schools particularly, we puzzled by how do parents keep up with multilingualism in their home when languages competing, you know, different languages, multiple languages competing for space, status, and educational goals. How do parents manage their children's formal education when dealing with multiple languages in use in the home? And in what ways can developing home language facilitate their children's academic performance? That's something very important for parents to, you know, work on, concentrate about, and, you know, because parents can't really do without thinking about their children's academic performance. And another thing is that how can schools tap into the linguistic and cultural resources of their pupils to create learning opportunities for children of a minority as well as majority background. So what is most important is that what do teachers need to know about family language policy? So we talk about family language policy, but what is it exactly? Not moving again. Okay. So what is family language policy? We think about, you know, language policy only happens at macro level. You know, you have a government and you have a worker space and you decide which language should be used. But in families, we do have a language policy as well. And language policy is, family language policy is defined as explicit and overt, as well as implicit and covert language planning by family members in relation to language choice and literacy practices within family domains and among family members. So language policy is all about choice. In very simple words, about the choice of language use. Okay, so the explicit and overt language planning is something very observable or visible that parents decide deliberately in terms of providing linguistic environment and literacy resources for facilitating the children's language development. The implicit and covert one is a little bit tricky because that is implicitly communicated through language socialization at home. So what language would you use? You're sending message to your children whether you value certain languages. That is all implicit through language socialization. And so why do we want to do family language policy? Of course, you said, oh yeah, that's because we want to help our children, or we want to help, let our children learn the school language, but what about your home languages as well? So in Singapore context, you have a mother tongues and, school language, English, and so on and so forth. But in migration context, you have to think about language of education normally is only the school language. So most of the parents will have to deal with home languages. Schools would not really provide any learning opportunities. So learning or developing a heritage language or home language rests solely on the parents' shoulder. Okay, you can go to community schools. We call it supplementary school in England, but that only happens during the weekend, only one day, a few hours. That doesn't really help the children to get much more information, about their home language. And very often the language teaching and teacher, qualification are not as developed as, a formal school like in Singapore context. So why do we need to do it? Because we need to understand how come some children growing up in monolingual environment become bilingual, and while other children growing up in bilingual environment become monolinguals. Right? How come? I mean, is this natural or not natural? So why and how do members of some families maintain their languages while the other members lose their languages? And what language practices do parents implement to promote or discourage language use, particular language use in their home? And how are these practices negotiated? And at the same time, at home, at the same time, how they interact with the broader societal language discourse, and also government and institutional language policy. I mean, it's not really just out of the blue, parents decide what language they use or to promote at home. It always related to institutional language policy and school language policy and government language policy. So it is not a Darwin theory of survival, of evolution, your weak language dies and strong language survives. It's not as simple as that. Okay, so that's why we need to study family language policy. And family language policy is like any other language policy. Of course, it has three components based on Spolsky's tripartite model. So that is language practices, what we do in the family, and language beliefs, so that's also ideology, what type of values you ascribe to certain languages. And language management is also the most important element, in my opinion, the component, because that is related to the concrete language related activities parents provide for their children, which including, literacy materials, help homework, and so on and so forth, right? And these three components, of course, they are interrelated. You can't really say I separate this and that, because, for example, we talk about language practice at home. That's also language interactions, right? These language interactions may connected to, when you organize the children's homework, activities. So you might use the language to deal with the situation. So the implicit language practices and explicit language planning are all interconnected. As we understand that I talk about language planning in families are always connected to institutional language policy. So you can see that families are not living in isolation. On the contrary, they always interact with those social linguistic, social economic, social culture, and social political contexts. And if you look at these circles, there are two circles, and they act as a wall separating the inner part of family from the outside wall. But I use a dotted line to do the circle, because these dotted line, they function almost like a membrane, allowing external forces to penetrate into family domain. Okay, so that's why, how they do it, they do it, through the mediational tool of language socialization. So you use language to pass on ideologies and beliefs and attitudes into the family domain. And very often those ideologies and beliefs are implicitly passed on to children. And sometimes you say, okay, no, but I really value my home language. And what the children really get is, you are not valued because at home you don't speak it. And you correct the children when children use home language. So that's the, contradictory part. So when we talk about children, bilingual children, and we need to remember there are two types, or even three types actually, of bilingual children. As we see the external forces influencing children, now we need to think about the children are growing up with a different language conditions and environment. And some children, we call them simultaneous bilinguals. So those are children who grow up with the two languages. For example, in intermarriage family, your children will are exposed to two languages, from birth. But I mean, in Singapore context, I think most of the children are bilingual first language speakers, because children hear English when they were born. Occasionally, you have grandparents or maids and coming to help. And these people speak the home language, or you call it mother tongue. So these two languages are simultaneously given to children. So children grow up with the two languages. The danger is that if children do not continue to hear the two languages, they will not really use the language, right? They will use only one. And then we have this sequential bilinguals. Those are the kids who were first exposed to L2 when they went to, or when they go to nursery, so 2 years or 3 years, or even later. And they are, but they catch up very fast, So they were, in terms of linguistic skills, they almost like monolingual children, in terms of L2 development. So then we have the issue of language at home versus language outside the home. Despite what kind of a bilingual children you are, so once children start schooling, I'm talking about UK context. I think it will happen also here. So as soon as the instructional language of English come into the picture, then the children tend to change their language. That could be the reason because they want to act normal like other children, monolingual children, or it could be their home language or mother tongue is not one of the cool languages in the society, or it could be also be the religious and cultural practices that do not really align with the larger, societal practices, or be very often being portrayed negatively in social media or in media, like in Singapore, not like in the UK and USA. And it could also be because of the visible appearance of skin colors, and they want to act out as normal like other children. So, but most importantly, that is because English is the language of school and assessment. They use English to learn, to be assessed. So that play a very important role for these children, going to school and come home and refuse to use home language. And if parents are not paying attention at this moment, they could, exclude children from accessing to home language for a lifelong time. So that is the danger. I mean, even though parents do feel like, bilinguals are having all kinds of advantages, but, in reality, they worry about their children's academic performance, right? So that poses quite some dilemma for parents. Should they persist with maintaining their home languages and raise their children bilingually, or should they drop home language maintenance in favor of concentrating on English or another language, majority language? So their concerns about academic development often leads to uncertainty and inconsistency, for parents to, use the language. And home language is slowly going out, and then parents will often get into English and, setting the linguistic habits in family. So we see language change, language shift, and more English is used in homes. It is also the case in Singapore, right? So I was in the class yesterday and I asked the students, most of them are coming from different backgrounds. So I asked them what language they use. I thought they would use Malay, Tamil, and Chinese, English. So did you speak English with your parents? Yes. And so when you grow up, you use English? Yes. How about the communication with your grandparents? Yeah, we learned a little bit Malay, or we learned a little bit Tamil or Malayalam with the grandparents. But the trend you see clearly is from mother tongues into English and into mono English model, almost like. So, as we see in this situation, there are two very, very strong forces of how we can maintain home language and raise bilingual children. The two forces are what I call internal forces and external forces. Internal forces is the parents' decision, knowledge about bilingualism, emotions, identities. Those will play a very important role for parents to make a decision. And external forces, of course, you have all the educational policy, social cultural practice, social linguistic norms in society, whether you're allowed to speak, bilingually, translingual, or whatever model, or you are encouraged to use only one language, English. So these two forces become blurred together and become the underpinning ideological foundations of our language choice and linguistic practices and language investment for parents. So it's not only how you become a good parent anymore for family language policy. That goes beyond that to include domains of education, public linguistic space, religions, practices, and also reflecting in individuals' different aspects in their life, such as emotions, identities, and political allegiance even, okay? So in this case, how can we raise bilingual children or multilingual children? So we need a concerted effort, of course. So we need to look at macro level policy support, meso level engagement, and micro level family language policy. So macro level, we're not going to deal with it today, because that's a policy we have no say, more or less, you know. I mean, unless, of course, grassroots activities and groups, but you can't really inform the government what's going on. I think in England, we can talk to our, what do you call them, MP, and go to your local council and saying, you know, we request mother tongue education, but it's impossible. It's so impossible. You know, in the United States, at least bilingual education has been implemented in areas. You know, in England, you either do it privately. I think in London, we'll have a couple of schools. We have only one Chinese bilingual school. And I don't know whether that is successful or is only for primary school level. Otherwise, most of the English schools have a multi-language program, but that's like, you know, once per, not once per week, but, you know, not very frequent. And the funny thing is, England is really, really monolingual. That's so normal. If you speak a different language, if you speak two languages, people just can't understand. How can you speak two languages? You know, I got questions very often. They will ask me, which language do you use to think? Which language do you use to dream? I mean, like, do you dream in particular languages? You don't remember in your dreams what language. You dream in all languages, don't you? And you think also in all languages. It's not separate. But for monolingual people, it's unsettled. You know, simply they don't really understand it. So, you know, talking about bilingual education, forget about it. You can't change people's mind. So what I'm thinking, like, you know, a program like Tian Feng's Tian Zhongfeng, right? His idea in American schools, that's not heard in England, at least. So what we going to focus is on meta level and micro level. Okay, these two, and mostly to understand how parents can help their children and what teachers need to know how to help these children as well. So one of the important things on language policy at different levels, that's language status. Okay, language status, that is represented through language in education policy. In Singapore, you emphasize all four languages, but in reality, the language status, in my opinion, of mother tongue has not been valued in terms of other aspects. It's more like a cultural value, right? You learn mother tongue as because it has a certain cultural value. But then if you compare English and mother tongue, so you say English can bring you, you know, economic gains and this and that, and mother tongues only have cultural value. Then you will compare. So why would I need to keep my culture that I can't really earn any money, right? So
also intrinsically, it's not the mother tongue of many people as well.
Yes, that's right.
So it's not your sociolinguistic definition of mother tongue as well, right? It's your official Mandarin Chinese or Malay or Tamil.
Yeah, and I often wonder that how many people actually kept their mother tongue, real mother tongue.
Yeah, the home language.
Yeah, the home language. And I don't think that's very strong hasn't been maintained. So the trend was two shifts. One shift is from the mother tongue, the real mother tongue, home language into Mandarin, or the designated mother tongue, and the other trend is from mother tongues into English. So there are two major shifts in Singapore, right? But of course, we all understand, from parents' perspective, if someone tells you, you got to have your children succeed in schools, and then what do? And especially if the parents are not well informed about the benefits of a bilingualism, cognitive benefits, then it's a problem. So if we want to raise bilingual children, we need to really emphasize the meta level. Forget about the macro, macro, and then the meso level. What I'm talking about is in schools, in classroom, and the family. So this brings us to this, contradictory about input, minority language at home and majority language English in home. So input is very important. If you think about intergeneration transmission are all done through input. You hear it, you talk about it. And if you don't have that intergenerational transmission, where are you? If children do not hear language, let alone how are they going to develop the language? So the input in home language is very vital. But how do we do that? What are the conditions? How do we make input at home, in home language? And we have to understand that languages are sort of resources for children to develop cognitive advancement. So input in home language can be done in several ways. So we talk about one parent, one language approach. This is all the communicative approach at home. You can do house approach, which is, you insist on having home language being spoken at home and societal language being spoken outside home. And once you establish the pattern, children will follow. Okay. The other one is your maximal engagement. We know that lots of parents are coming from different culture, ethnic group into racial marriage, for example. So some of the parents do not speak the language of the minority language. Like in my family, for example, both languages are minority language actually in my family, because my husband is Dane and his language is Danish. And I speak in Chinese with my children, but my husband never felt threatened that by we using Chinese. He doesn't really intervene. In some families, one of the parents could feel like, are they talking about something about me? But my husband never really feel the danger in that way. So he's always very understandable, and he also learned a few, Chinese words. So there's no threatening for him to accept the kind of language we use at home. But I mean, those are the communicative approaches at home. But exactly what type of linguistic input and discourse strategy can parents adopt in their daily interactions? That's also something we need to, take into consideration. So, Liz Lanza, in her study of bilingual children, and she found out that parents normally have these 5 strategies on a continuum. So you start from monolingual context to a bilingual context. You use minimum grasp and then express the guess and adopt the reputation, move on strategy, and code switching. So all these will contribute to your children's language development. I will show you what they meant. Minimum grasp strategy. This is when children are quite young. You establish the habit. If children start using the language A, which is not the desired language at home, and parents will respond and say, what is it? You know, for example, if we use Chinese and English, if the children say, Mommy, I want water, and then I would respond, 你说什么? Okay, 你说什么? 再说一遍. The children will take the hint, and might say, oh, Mama, 我要喝水. Okay, so you establish this habit, and children will automatically, in my family, that is always the pattern. So my children knows that I speak Danish, that's the language that we use between my husband, but they never speak Danish to me. Never. That's not my language, they said. Yeah, very interesting. So express the guess strategy is that the children will use a language, non-desired language, and then parents will say, if the children say, Mommy, I want to have water, then the parents will respond, say, 你说什么? 你说什么? Okay, I guess, 你说你要喝水吗? Then the children will say, yeah. Sometimes children will repeat and say, yeah, 我要喝水, or other times the children will not. But you need to provide the input, because children sometimes don't have words.
Yeah.
So you need to provide the input and repetition. As again, the children will say, Mommy, I want bottled water. Now you repeat. Say, 你要一瓶水. The children know. Okay, that's how you say it in Chinese.
Mhm.
And move on strategy, that you're going to the dangerous zone now. Okay, if you go move on strategy, you notice that very often. Your children go to school and then they come back, they use English with you.
Mm.
This time, if you let go, that will become a pattern. You speak your language, the children speak their language.
Mm.
So there is no, well, there is communication, provided that parents understand English. If parents don't understand English, that may be different. But if parents do understand languages, that's the danger with this parallel kind of a move on strategy is going to happen. And when you start allowing code switching into a family, that means your home language is going down the path. You know, forget about raising bilingual children, you are losing. And it's the danger. So that's the trend that if you look at this continuum, right? So monolingual context will provide the maximum input for your children to learn the home language. And if you come into the bilingual context, then you're gone. As a danger. I know lots of people say, okay, but translanguaging, or we're in the translanguaging talk. In families, no. Once you start translanguaging, you're losing the language. Because we all know 3 generations of migration. The first generation, the migrants' parents do not know the mainstream language. They keep the home language at home. Second generation, they know both language at home and language of society. And the third generation become monolingual. And the language is gone. Yeah. So that is the danger. Eh? So what type of bilingual environment, you know, when we talk about the language management activity, what types of bilingual environments are rich? And how can parents create them? The literacy environment and structured activities are actually very important at home as well. So parents need to provide the literacy resources and including digital resources. I mean, nowadays children do, you know, playing games and all that. You can create, you know, force children, create an environment for them to watch cartoons in home language. I remember my husband's colleague, they're German, so we all live in Canada at that. They have only one son. And they don't want the child to become a monolingual English or French, or actually it's bilingual French and English. The child their son refused to speak German. So what they did was to lock him in a room, it's very harsh, lock him lock him in the room and provide all kinds of books and, cartoon films and everything in German. So, well, finally the message got to him, he maintained the language and the language was not changed, and he nowadays speaks 3 languages. He's a very successful surgeon in Canada, a very Canadian woman, of course. So it's very interesting, you need to let children understand that this language is important to you as well. So frequent library visits, literacy play, play with the language, and literacy activities and parental modeling. These are important. Those are the things that we do with the children in English. We should also do it in your home language. And in Singapore context, you have the resources. The thing is how to persuade parents to take on this. And so rich literacy input and parents' familiarity with the children's literature is also very important, because many parents have said, oh yeah, we have lots of home language literacy materials at home. I remember that when I was in Singapore, went to school, we had this reading activity. We asked the children to bring a book into school. So we had this 90 minutes or 30 minutes of morning reading. And the children brought in like a adult magazine. And it was not really relevant to the children at all. So they don't really know what resources. A study in Canada, Monica, she doesn't do it. It's a bilingual person. She actually look at how much parents know about bilingual literature. And the parents all say, we do English, we do French, in Canada, Canadian context. And then she provided a list of those literatures and saying, can you recognize any? The French parents know, the English parents, yes, recognize the English literature, but French, no. So this also shows that parents are not really well informed with the children's literature. And children's literature actually do play a very important role So you need to provide all that literature. I remember that I worked with the Baoqi when I was here. We're trying to identify a list of mother tongue books. I think Baoqi carried out quite successfully. I don't know how it works now, but it was in the past. Okay, so when it comes to literacy development, we all know vocabulary and input are important. Vocabulary helps children to develop the reading comprehension. So what kind of vocabulary? And when we talk about vocabulary, and we talk about the vocabularies they hear and they read, so there are 2 types, expressive and receptive vocabularies. And receptive vocabularies are very important for children because, once they start reading, they do not just read, they guess. So a lot of reading takes place through the context and the guess. And in the decoding period, if they have this verbal vocabulary, it will help them to decode and learn comprehension. So that vocabulary comes from your interaction with the children. Constantly communication with the children, talk about books, talk about life, and that comes into the play with the input. So we talk about input as a quantity input and qualitative input. And you will ask, how do we know what is the quality and quantity? Okay. Quality is the different variety of topics you talk to children. That's where you gain over quality vocabularies. Quantity is the amount of talk you have, either through books or everyday conversation. So for example, now parents go to school and teachers say, No. You need to talk more in English for your children because your children are like behind and she's not following the study. You need to speak more English. And the parent says, okay, let's do more English interactions at home. Then the results. Okay. One thing is that these more talk at home in English may not enrich your children's repertoire, linguistic repertoire, because you yourself, if you yourself are not competent speaker, you think about the language structure, the linguistic complexity, the sentence structure. How can you provide this in a natural conversation for your children? So they will not enrich your children's linguistic repertoire. They may not provide a cognitive academic advantage for children because you can't engage in a deeper level with the student. You could do it maybe in your home language, but you may not be able to deal with it in, academic language or in the school language. And the third one is they may not provide a complexity, linguistic structure, and variety of words. So in other words, they input quality and quantity shrinks, right? So that's the danger. But parents, sometimes they don't really understand. I teacher said this, what do I do? And they don't provide enough context for the parents to understand how to provide those input. So for parents, there are lots of activities that they could do. They could do unstructured activity. Just let children play, but you need to interact with them. You need to provide the opportunity for children to do elaborated discourse. Ask the children to talk, to tell you their past and the day, I always gave an example. When I was young, I grew up in a military compound, right? So all children go to the same school. So, and occasionally we have students coming from outside the circle. And one of the students, he was really, really poor and not from our circle. So he was fantastic, and in all our conversation and whatever, he always scored the best. And we had this, example conversation. His composition are always read by the teacher. And we were puzzled, he was from poor family. And how did he manage to do that? And then the teachers asked him, so he said, I have to repeat what I do every day to my father. My father accompanied me to school. And sometimes, I go home and my father always said to me, dear child, I came from a very poor family. I had no chance to learn. Could you please tell me what you've done? So this is from, narrative recount every day. He has to make it very concrete. So abstract ideas were developed through the retelling about school experience. So he developed this whole process of how to tell story, make it, cohesive, and this becoming a training for him. And so he writes things very beautiful. That's how he developed this skill. So talking is important. Develop children's abstract thinking. Reading to children with children or read by themselves also does that. Why? Because literary language is different from our everyday language. In literature, children learn structures, linguistic complexity, sentence structure, all that comes with literacy development and academic development. So you develop that. Okay, so you build, you can build a bilingual library for your children. It doesn't have to be, books. It can be games, it can be other things. There are lots of resources now, online, offline, So those are the things that we need to really take into consideration for parents. And I think teachers need to inform parents as well, if they know the bilingual resources. So the last part is to bring home culture and language into school. And school has to be a safe space for children to use that language, to recognize their ability and capability. So we talk about lots of fund of knowledge. I know it's a old concept, but we're still using it, and it's still very workable in schools. And bring children, bring a home culture and language to school through show and tell. Okay. Like Canada, they all did this in England, but by then the multiculturalism was still celebrated. Nowadays, multiculturalism is not celebrated in England. And multicultural celebration by Andrea Young. She and Christine Elo, they've done quite a lot in France. How to celebrate a different, cultural tradition. It's almost like the project Tim Feng has presented. We were in a different talk. So it's like simply talk about different traditions and use parents as a supporter. Interview their own parents and bring all this valuable resources into classroom. And collaborative story creation, which Jim Cummings has done with a group of minority language students. They use the children's home background and histories and create textbooks for children in schools. I mean, you can do it in English, you can do it in your home language, but these are powerful texts that they co-created and use it as a textbook in schools. And you can create a safe space, allowing different language to be used. Okay, this has been demonstrated by Cortez and Brock's study in England, and multilingual and multicultural literature project. This, Barbara Kama, they've done quite a lot of work in Australia, talking about differences, okay? There are differences, but you are allowed to talk about it. Of course, the home language and school language are different. Home culture and school culture are also different. This can be built into classroom activities, actually. And the last one is sharing different educational practices through communicative workshops, which I have done in England, because teachers don't agree with parents and parents don't agree with the teachers. And what we do, the two of them, not hate each other, but they argue. The parents are saying the teachers are not valuing their children, and the teacher said the parents are using their, pedagogy and mess up with the school teaching. So what you do in this context, you create a communicative workshop. I did both with the teachers and the parents to let them understand what the common goals are. Okay, so I think I will stop here and concluding remarks, and just to let you know that teachers' attitudes and ideologies influence what parents do, and parents should be allowed to have a close connection with the teachers and talk about the issues. But very often, parents are not allowed to come in even closer to teachers, especially parents from minority background, and they feel not confident in doing it. And in England and some other contexts, the teachers are not really always friendly. So that's, it's a trouble. So your ideologies and practices sometimes come into context and then into conflicts, okay? And what we really need to understand is, raising bilingual children is a concerted effort, both from school and parents and from teachers and government. That's it. So the article that the talk is based on the book, there are a lot of practical guides in this book, all by, practitioners and academics. It's a very hands-on thing. My chapters, in chapter 6, so if you need it, actually for once, I got paid to write them. I got paid to write because they are catered for schools. And so the schools, every school buy this book in England. Yeah, so it's very, very nice. Yeah. Thank you very much.